Hey everyone, EIGA here. In today's video, we're taking a look back at all the wireless ergo split keyboards I've featured on the channel so far. I'll be sharing updates on how I've been using them, which one ended up being my favorite, and last but not least, I'll be answering some of the questions you guys have been asking in the comment section. Let's dive in. As some of you that follow my channel already know, the heavy lifting on all my keyboards was done by Void, a real-life friend and shadowway figure here on my channel. 2 years ago, he managed to convince me to finally give split ergo keys a shot by building a Corne keyboard. With 42 keys in its 6-column version and a not too aggressive column stagger, it was the perfect gateway drug into the world of ergo split keyboards. Don't get me wrong though, moving to something like this from a standard 60% keyboard does take some getting used to, but it's not as radical of a change as some of the other keyboards out there, including the other ones I'll be taking a look at today. It also helps that the Corne has a sizable following and there are lots of available kits, mods and well-documented build guides. The one I have in front of me today is as close to an endgame build as you can get it. Nice nano controllers, nice view displays, hot swappable sockets, and my personal favorite switches, the Gateron Oil Kings. The case is a 3D printed design made by Void, shown here in Prusament PETG carbon fiber filament. I featured the tinted version of this case in my other 2 videos on the Corne, but since I don't daily the keyboard anymore, I feel like this flat version of the case suits it better, as the keyboard is now mostly just sitting on my shelf. What I was personally looking to get out of using the Corne was an improvement to my touch typing abilities. The customization that comes with an open source firmware was of course another reason, and so were the aesthetics. The Achilles heel of the Corne, however, is the stagger of its outermost columns, which makes using the pinky finger somewhat awkward. To reach keys on those columns, you need to slightly rotate your wrist. This was the same reason Void eventually ended up moving away from using the Corne in favor of the Klein, a split keyboard with a splayed layout that addresses precisely this issue. So instead of rotating my wrists in order to properly use all my fingers when touch typing, I was cheating by overextending my ring finger. I denied it for a while, blaming my muscle memory, but another keyboard eventually proved that not to be the case and that there was hope for me yet. My nitpicking aside, there's nothing wrong with building one and sticking with it, if the layout works for you, that is. And don't get me wrong, coming from a 60% keyboard, the ergonomics are a massive step up. That being said, I now see the Corne as a stepping stone, but it doesn't have to be. It has all the necessary ingredients to be an endgame keyboard. Back when I was still dailying the Corne, Void was trying to convince me to try out the Klein, or keyboards with a splayed layout in general. But instead of going down that path for our next build video, we decided to work on another project we've been eyeing for quite some time, and that was the Charybdis from Bastard Keyboards. If you ignore the sculpted shape and the unique use of flexible PCBs that enable said shape, and the fact that there's an actual trackball involved, the keyboard is basically a 3D-fied Corne. We have a choice of 5 or 6 columns, the column stagger is pretty much identical, and the thumb keys follow a similar logic and placement. But what's truly impressive about the Charybdis build was that we made it work wirelessly, even though this was and still is an unsupported mod. Void did all the amazing work on making this possible, and the result is a fully functional wireless split keyboard with an integrated trackball. The build video for the Charybdis is by far the most watched video on my channel, with over 400,000 views at the time of publishing this video. Interestingly, only a tiny fraction of the users who viewed the video ended up subscribing to the channel. So if you do find yourself on this video and would like to see more of this type of content in the future, then subscribing and enabling the notification bell would be highly appreciated. Let's go back to the Charybdis then. What drew us to it initially was, evidently, the idea of having a trackball within easy reach, and I was especially interested in using it as part of my video editing workflow. But I don't think I ever ended up using the trackball to its full potential. Void did make use of the trackball quite a bit more than I did, and was using it extensively on his 5-column build. For me, the biggest downside of the trackball was not the tracking accuracy itself, but the mouse keys. For most use cases, it's fine, clicking on a tab, moving something around, but for complex actions like needing to hold 1 or 2 modifiers down in addition to the mouse key itself, it can quickly end up looking like you're playing a game of finger twister. I used the Charybdis as my daily keyboard for around 3 to 4 months, and while it was a lot of fun, I never really felt like the ergonomics clicked with me fully, or made my life that much easier. It was just a bit too bulky for me and perhaps better suited to users with larger hands. The issue I mentioned earlier with having to rotate your wrists to reach the outermost columns on the Corne keyboard is made worse on the Charybdis simply by the fact that you now have to also avoid touching the trackball. Well, only on the right half, but still, it's an extra obstacle. I should mention that later updates to the ZMK firmware improved the trackball experience on the Charybdis and fixed some of the bugs. As it is currently, the trackball is perfectly usable over Bluetooth. The only thing you really notice is the lower polling rate. But I wouldn't say it feels laggy. It's absolutely fine, provided you don't expect to play competitive shooters with it. Despite the Charybdis not clicking with me ergonomically, there's no denying the sheer coolness and wow factor of the design. So for that alone, I will always regard it with a degree of reverence. It was such a cool project and the video was so successful that for the next one we decided to go for something radically different in terms of ergonomics and an overall much simpler project that didn't involve any custom PCB designs or dubious code snippets taken from the bowels of GitHub. And that ended up being the Totem, a low-profile keyboard with a striking minimalist design featuring a splayed column layout and just 38 keys. The original case and keycaps for this build were all 3D printed using resin, with the Totem logo filled in by hand with acrylic paint, a really understated and sleek look. For today's video, however, we have cooked up something special, the Totem Redux. Void remixed the original case and had it split into 3 parts, so that the design could be printed on FDM printers without requiring the use of supports. My contribution to the Totem Redux would be the Mote Keycaps, a 3D printable set that integrates perfectly within the design of the Totem. You can of course find all the files needed to print your own Totem Redux down in the description below. I've also printed 2 complete sets of these on my Voron printer in 2 color schemes, which give the Totem a completely new vibe, much more playful but still minimalistic through and through. I have no words for how much I like the aesthetics at play here, and the color combinations possible with the plethora of available filaments make me really curious to see what you guys will end up building. But let's backtrack a bit and talk about what using the Totem is actually like. Going back all the way to my very first impression, I have to say it was a bit of a shock. The columns play, the use of homegrown mods, and the insanely light kale pink switches, all of these were things I had to get to terms with. It was a lot to take in at first, and I was so terrible at typing on it that I thought something must have been wrong with the keyboard. But here's the thing, I've been maining the Totem ever since. I ended up loving every aspect of it. Display helped me properly touch type with all my fingers for the very first time on my journey. Homegrown mods have been a revelation, and I grew to love using modifier keys in that way, so much so that I often catch myself attempting to do so on regular keyboards. And lastly, I even ended up liking the kale pink switches with their feather light actuation weight despite their obnoxious clacky sound. Many of you back then suggested I try the sunset tactile switches, and I did, but honestly I did not find them to be that much better, and to me they feel somewhat fatiguing and not at all suitable for gaming. I'm also not sure I understand the point of tactile switches with such a limited travel distance. There's no instance in which I would stop myself from bottoming out on the chock low profile switches. But the switches that finally clicked with me are the brand new ambience silent switches. They get rid of that typing on Lego sound, and the feel is almost perfect with only a slight bit of graininess. These switches make the Totem feel like a much heftier keyboard than it actually is. I guess that by now it's pretty clear which of these 3 ergo split keyboards is my favorite. It's certainly interesting that a super low profile keyboard that makes no real attempt to be ergonomical, outside of its excellent layout of course, is the one that I find the most comfortable to type on. There's something to be said as well about a 5-column keyboard with homegrown mods. Everything is always within reach, no need to move your wrists at all. It's not just minimalism for minimalism's sake, it actually makes sense. I should also mention the absolutely insane battery life. We're using what is essentially a dongle setup, with one controller always plugged in via USB and the halves both behaving as peripherals. This results in a battery life measured in months, not days. I recharge the 2 halves every couple of months whenever I remember to do it, but so far I've never actually depleted the battery on my Totem. The efficiency of the ZMK firmware should be praised here as well, no doubt. For comparison, the Charybdis and the Corne each last about a week between charges on the central half, which is still impressive, especially considering that the Charybdis is also powering a trackball sensor. But it's no match to the charge and forget experience you get with a dongle setup. Void has also been using the Totem as his daily keyboard, so it's not just me who has been won over by this little keyboard. The only thing we're both missing still is the superior feel of the MX style switches. There is one keyboard we might be building next, and that is the Chlor, which is more or less a Totem with MX style switches designed by the same person behind the Totem. Let us know down in the comments if you'd like to see a video on that, or if you have any other suggestions. Okay, so now that we've covered the keys, let's take a look at some of the questions you guys have been asking in the comments on all those build videos. Starting with the Corne, by far the most asked question was how and where to get a pre-assembled one. As I mentioned already, the Corne keyboard is one of the most popular split ergo designs, and that means there's already shops out there that sell ready-to-use Corne keyboards. I can't recommend any particular shops, as I haven't tried them personally, but just a few minutes of Googling should be all it takes to find one. Here's an interesting question on the Charybdis, asking if I've tried the Nano Charybdis, and if I think it's better suited, in particular for users with smaller hands. And I think so. Void's build is a 5-column Nano Charybdis, and if I had to do it all over again, I think that's what I would go for as well, especially since I grew to really appreciate home row mods on the Totem. We've also seen quite a few questions about swapping the trackball on the Charybdis with a different input device, most commonly a touchpad. There's actually a mod available on GitHub that does exactly that, and I'll have it linked in the description. I think it could potentially be a better fit, and certainly it wouldn't get in the way as much as a trackball. Others suggested using encoders, trackpoints, analog sticks, or even Hall effect sensors. Most of these are doable with some tinkering, some definitely more difficult than others, and we'll link some useful rabbit holes to follow in the description. We've also seen people asking about a detailed build guide for the wireless Charybdis, and for that I would recommend taking a look at Eren's comprehensive build guide over on GitHub, which of course you can also find linked in the description below. Last but not least, let's go over some of the questions asked in the Totem comment section. Overwhelmingly, and understandably so, there were a lot of questions regarding the dongle setup, specifically on how it could be adapted to other boards. There's no clear-cut answer here, as there's not a single unified one-size-fits-all solution, but for the Corne, you can now find the Corne dongle branch on my ZMK config repo on GitHub. I've tested it and it works fine, however, the nice nano displays no longer work properly. If your build doesn't have screens, then this would be by far the superior configuration. That is, if you have a spare controller lying around. Here's another interesting question. If I had to learn to type all over again, would I do it on a normal keyboard or jump straight to a split ergo keyboard like this one? Well, it's quite difficult to say. The standard QWERTY keyboard is so ubiquitous that it's hard to imagine someone not already being used to it. But if we're talking about the art of touch typing on a physical keyboard, there's probably quite a bit of people today that only interact with touchscreen keyboards, typing away with their thumbs instead of their index fingers. So if I were a blank slate and wanted to learn to touch type from scratch, then sure, I'd go straight for a split ergo keyboard, as I feel it's an excellent way to lay down the foundations for good typing habits. Anyway, that's about it for this one. I have some very interesting content planned out for this year, and I'm excited to get working on that. Hopefully I won't keep you guys waiting for too long. Bye for now.